Well, welcome everybody to the final two parts of our Baptist history series that we've been doing on the church history. We have with us tonight Brother Barry Bronner, who's going to be covering the part of these lessons that's covering the church in America. So we want to introduce him. Let's continue to be in prayer for him tonight as he goes into this lesson. Brother Bronner, we will turn it over to you.
Starting off, I appreciate the opportunity of being able to do this. I appreciate the previous lessons, Brother Compton. He's always just been a walking library to me. If some of you out there is interested in history and you really don't know good history from some of the other things that you hear, I would advise you. He would be able to direct you towards some, I think, good books that would get you started. I wish people would take a bit more of an interest in history, but I do appreciate his lessons. And Brother Miller's brought us up through the Dark Ages, and it's fell my lot here concerning the church in America. And Brother Jenkins for his effort and his ability to do this. I'm thankful that we have this technology that we can use, and I think that this is certainly a good use. So appreciate him very much in doing this. And I had a lesson that I was going to do, but then after hearing the lessons, I just felt like this one here would probably fit in a little bit more so. And I guess my subject would be more toward the Baptist influence upon America, basically toward our national religious liberty that we have. I believe that this is the first country on the face of the earth that has a religious liberty, a bylaw that that's within her laws, and I'm thankful that we have what we have, and it didn't just happen. It was fought for, and seem like today we just don't really understand it enough to appreciate what we have, and being able to worship God by the dictations of our heart. And our forefathers fought for those things, and through God's help, we're able to accomplish those things that we could have what we have today. So I guess tonight, and before I get into my basic thought, there, you know, in order to have this religious liberty that we have, there had to be some battles. And, of course, there's always the spiritual battle that'll, it'll be going on until Jesus comes back. But in order to have this religious liberty that we have, there was also the physical battle that had to take place. And a lot of people's not comfortable with that, but we had to break away from Britain in order to establish a nation to have religious liberty. So there had to be the physical battle, the Revolutionary War from 1775 to 1783. And there was also the political battles, and that had to be fought in order to have laws put into place that we could have the liberty that we have. So tonight, if you would bear with me, I want to speak mostly, I guess, toward the to the physical battles that was in basically toward the Revolutionary War. And what I'm wanting to do is just be able to point out some of the Baptist input or the Baptist influence. And I pray that this would not be taken in any way arrogantly. I try real hard to refrain from the word proud. I am not proud that I am a Baptist, but I am very, very humbled to be a Baptist. And the more I understand about the history, the more humbling it is to me. So if we would, and I do desire an interest in your prayers, we want to speak about the Baptist influence, even concerning the Revolutionary War. And before we get into that, I'd like to maybe first go and look at, I really believe that Revelations 12 is having reference toward the journey of the congregation of the Lord. And I want to just skim the surface of that just a little bit to get us up to America. But I believe that the first 5 verses in Revelations 12, it speaks about the woman there that was clothed with the sun and the moon, and how that she been travailing in birth to deliver a child, and it said that when she would deliver the child, in verse 4, it talked about how that the dragon, being Satan, would stand before the woman ready to devour the child. And this woman, we know that it was the Virgin Mary that was the woman of Israel. But in this 12th chapter, this is referring to the congregation of the Lord as far as Israel. And of course, out of Israel would come the Savior, not only of Israel, but of the entire world for all those that would believe. So Satan was done everything he could to devour and to prevent this from ever happening. In Revelations 12 and 5, it said that, and she had brought forth the man child, and this, I believe, is having reference to Christ, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. In this, having reference to Jesus coming through Mary, which came through the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but we know, of course, she was overshadowed by the Holy Ghost. But Jesus, when he was born and in his 3.5-year ministry, he set up and he established his church kingdom. And in doing so, he commissioned her, of course, to go into all the world. And then Jesus was caught up unto his throne. And that's what I think 12 and 5 is having reference to, was how that he would be caught up into God and to his throne. And so Jesus, as we speak, not only is our high priest seated at the right hand of the Father, but at the same time, he is also already our king over the church kingdom that he set up and established. And if you remember over in Matthew 24, and I guess it's Luke 22, maybe, some of the church had approached Jesus and asked him a question concerning things about the temple, and they were speaking about the temple, and Jesus told them that a time was coming when not one stone would be left upon top of the other. And they basically asked him 3 questions, but we're just addressing the one. They asked him, say, when will this be? And he gave them an answer, and he said in Matthew's account, he said that when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, he said, basically, know that desolation is nigh, and he said, flee. If you notice, he really expressed to the church an urgency when they see this coming to flee into the mountains, to leave. And Luke's account, basically the same thing. He said that whenever they would see the enemy coming and camping around the holy place, talking about Jerusalem, there again, Luke's account was what they was to flee with a great urgency and go into the mountains. That flight would be more than 2,000 miles, as they had to flee completely off up into the Alps, up around eastern France and Germany, and all up through the Alps up there. And I believe that they hid out, the way I understand it, up there for probably 1,260 years, at least, according to 12 and 6. And as they were there in their hiding, Brother Miller talked about the dark ages, and the Lord had reserved this place for them, that he could feed her there and to care for her. And then when the time was come, you'll find over in the Song of Solomon, and I think it's about the 2nd chapter down through there, when he begins calling the church out from the Alps, and he tells them to come out from their secret places, to come out from their hiding, and they began coming out. Now, don't misunderstand, there was churches scattered everywhere, but I really believe that the bulk of the church, the majority, if you would, was hid out up in the Alps. And then when he called on the church to come out from the cliffs and come out from their hiding places, they started downward, if you think of it, so to speak, westward, maybe down into France and the Valley of Piedmont. Of course, getting on over into Britain, and we know that there was already churches in Britain. I think Hillcliff, most people record that as being established as early as 987, and we know it was recorded as early as 1353 because of headstones. But anyway, there was churches scattered, but the majority of the churches had to come, and they got over to Britain, around England and Wales, and having come to the coast of the Great Atlantic, they had gone just as far as they could go. I think it's a very similar picture, if you would, of the Red Sea having gone as far as that they could go, and then God parted the waters. And I do believe that that this is what Revelations 12 and 14 is having reference to, where it said that when they got there, just as far as they could go, that he granted to the woman, she was granted wings of an eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, where she'd be nourished for times and a half a time from the face of the serpent. And personally, I am beyond convinced that that wilderness, to where he would brought her to, was nothing but other than the American soul. And America was set up, I believe, as a refuge for the Lord's church, for the elect lady. And so when she got here, and I believe Brother Miller made mention maybe last week about the very first church being established in 1638, and I totally agree with John Clark, the Church of Newport. So the very first church that here on American soil was probably established in very early winter of 1638. And I'm not going to get into all that with John Clark and coming through Massachusetts and getting in trouble with the state church, but he got out of their jurisdiction, and I believe he established a church there in Rhode Island. And 6 years later, he moved over into Newport, and it became known as the Newport Baptist Church. So we have the church here in America, the very first Baptist church. And like we said, John Clark, when he got here, he found himself just about immediately in trouble with the state church, because he was preaching against infant baptism, and he was preaching Baptist doctrine. And so the last verse of Revelation 12:17 talks about how that the devil, or Satan, the dragon, was wroth with a woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So when they got here, they found out that just as the land of Canaan was there for their taking. And after 40 years of unbelief, when they believed, they went over and they found the land to be just what God said it was, and they were able to take it, but it was theirs for their taking. When the church got here to America, it was a sort of a history repeating itself. It was here, it was a refuge, but it had to be developed, and it had to be for our taking. But and I want to notice as well, like we said, the very first church, 1638. Well, if you were to look, and David Benedict, Encyclopedia of the Baptists, I think is a very good, got a lot of good information in it. But in 1638 was the first church. Well, if you were to go from 1638 to 16, just say go to 1700. From 1638 to 1700, you've got 62 years. In that 62 years, there wasn't but 16 known Baptist churches in the entire 13 colonies. They didn't come over rapidly. I guess a lot of it was fear of the unknown, sailing across the Atlantic, and a lot of people drowned and lost their lives. But the church, in the year of 1700, there was only 16 known Baptist churches in the entire 13 colonies. And then if you was to go from 1638 to 1738, that's 100 years after the church had first arrived here, 100 years, you'll find that there was 39 Baptist churches. And if you just really think about it, there wasn't a lot of Baptist growth to begin with. And I live in Macon County, Tennessee, and we've got almost that many churches right here in the county. And I think sometimes maybe that's why we just don't appreciate one another as much as what we should. But in 100 years, and I really want you to just really get a hold of that, there wasn't that many churches. Now, what's going to happen in 1738, 100 years after the church had first got here, God was going to ignite a great awakening. And I know a lot of people have read a lot about the Great Awakening. And I think Jonathan Edwards probably was one of the ones that promoted it and really started it, and George Whitefield, of course. But in 1635, I think it was when Jonathan Edwards began preaching. Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, that sparked off this great revival. They were actually Congregationalists that were Protestants. They had found a spiritual birth like that the Congregational church never ever heard of or never preached. And after that, they had an experimental knowledge of being saved. They started preaching this, and God used them. And what you'll find out in the Great Awakening, the Baptists actually became beneficiaries of the Great Awakening. 1741, which is 103 years after the very first Baptist church, Jonathan Edwards stood at Plainfield in Connecticut and preached the sermon that was so well known of. The title of it was "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." And during those services, there was literally thousands of people, and it's hard to imagine, but there was literally thousands of people who got saved due to those services. Some of them got saved later, but it stemmed off of those services. And I had the privilege of standing right there at that marker not very long ago, right up there in Connecticut, where he had actually preached that sermon. But anyway, they the Great Awakening caused many people to experience an experimental knowledge of being saved. And once they got saved, they understood that their infant baptism that they had no effect, no bearings whatsoever. They still had to be born again and had to be saved. And after that, they went and you find many of them started joining the Baptist churches, and they experienced a believer's baptism. That Baptists had always taught an experimental knowledge of being saved, and they'd always taught that it is only a believer's baptism. So when these hundreds and thousands of people started getting saved, they realized that this is what the few Baptists had been teaching all along. So they started joining up with the Baptists. So we talked about from 1638 to 1738 only having 39 churches. And you'll find that in David Benedict. I think it's page 366 in the Baptist Encyclopedia. But 39 churches. Now I want you to watch what happened from 1738 is when about the time that the Great Awakening began. And let's just say 1741. That was the year that Jonathan Edwards preached that sermon. If we take from 1741 and we go out 50 years to 1791, which is the year that we adopted the First Amendment of religious liberty, in those 50 years, it is recorded that we went from 39 churches to 872 Baptist churches. It's just beyond comprehension of the growth of the Baptists through those great awakenings, and people that were getting saved even of other beliefs. They experienced a spiritual birth, and they started coming and joining the Baptist churches. I think it was George Whitefield one time that actually made the statement, chickens don't like water and ducks do, but George Whitefield made a statement. He's concerning all of his converts, all of those that got saved under his preaching. He said so many of his chicks had turned to ducks. In other words, they were joining the Baptist churches. And another congregationalist made a statement one time, and what he said was that surely we have merely been a nursery for the Baptists. After they got saved, they were replanted into the Baptist churches. So it's always been fascinating to me to know that up until the Great Awakening, there were actually just a few Baptist churches on the 13 colonies. And then it was like an explosion from 1741 to 1791. And now then 1791, you've got 872 Baptist churches. And that's just, God was raising up a generation. He was preparing them. I've always believed that God pre-equips us for everything that he leads us into. And he was pre-equipping his church to be able to go and to take this land, to establish a land that we could have a religious liberty. And I'm thankful that our forefathers suffered what they did. So I want to get into just a little bit about the physical battle. The Revolutionary War, like we said, was from 1775 to 1783, about an 8-year war. And I want to ask this question up front as we go into this. Were Baptists involved beyond prayer? And I know a lot of people don't like the answer, and I'm not going to, everybody's got their convictions on fighting for your liberty. But I'm just going to tell you the reality of our forefathers had to fight for what we have today. So the question is, were the Baptists involved beyond prayer? I've got a few points I want to make tonight, and then we'll try to wrap this up. But point number one, in June of 15th, 1775, George Washington, of course, this was before he became president, at the age of 43, he was appointed commander-in-chief of the American Revolutionary War. During the same meeting, the Congress had met with an order of business, and they decided to have what they called a public fasting and prayer on behalf of seeking God on their behalf. Upon this, Washington himself insisted on appointing good chaplains, which is basically preachers, for each military regiment, and that all the soldiers would have the opportunity for God's counsel throughout the battles. And I quote George Washington. He says, because that the blessings and the protections from heaven are at all times necessary. And that was George Washington as he was commander-in-chief. So they appointed these chaplains. Now, the Virginia Convention began to appoint the chaplains, and they appointed Elijah Craig, Lewis Craig, Jeremiah Walker, and John Williams to preach to the Continental soldiers. Every one of these ministers that was selected were Baptist. So I just want to just try to show a little bit of just a little of the Baptist influence that Baptists should be the salt of the earth. Respect has to be earned. And I'm afraid today the Baptist is letting up. And if we don't feel like the Baptist is respected, maybe we need to look in the mirror at the problem. But anyway, they selected Baptist ministers to be the chaplains. Now, so point number 2 that I would like to look at is there was an understandable question concerning the commandment of thou shalt not kill. And like I said, everybody just holds their own convictions. But a lot of them had issues because of their belief that thou shalt not kill, and if they should actually fight for their freedom. Well, in the moment of the doubt of some, there was a Baptist minister that was selected by the name of David Jones. David Jones was invited to preach to a massive number of troops going into the Revolutionary War. The title to his sermon was Defense in a Just Cause is Sinless. Defensive war in a just cause is sinless. His sermon apparently was heaven sent, fueled them to see that truly there was a just cause, that God had planted a good vine in the vineyard, and through stewardship, it is to be protected. Just as the land of Canaan was there for their taking, this Baptist message was printed and spread as a fire for patriotism throughout the colony. So I think we have to recognize some Baptist influence there. Even many of the Quakers actually had converted over to Baptists because of their personal convictions on fighting for their liberty, which true Quakers did not uphold that. So many Quakers actually were converted over to Baptists because of that. During that time frame, Daniel Boone's parents were actually they left the Quakers and joined, I think, is Murphy, maybe it's Murphy Baptist Church that they joined. So they actually converted over and joined the Baptist churches. Daniel Boone's sister, of course, is a Baptist and baptized right over here in Tompkinsville, Kentucky. Followed Mulkey down here. But one of the things that Washington was very aware of was the number of the Baptists that was in the New England state. He had spoke on how he had surveyed the country only to find Baptists everywhere, and they certainly did not hide their light under a bushel. He also acknowledged that the services of the Baptists are as a firm friend of civil liberty and are the preserving promoters of the Revolutionary War. There again, that was a quote from George Washington. A little bit of insight there on some Baptist influence. I'd like to look at a third point, and this is when Britain actually invaded. And this is just one incident. But in 1775, it was on an April Sunday, and I don't know which Sunday it was, but what I read was it was on April. And it's on a Sunday morning that they were having services at Hopewell Baptist Church in New Jersey. And while they were in the midst of the service, there was a messenger that came riding in out of breath to deliver a message to the Colonel Holton, which was a member of the Hopewell Baptist Church and was present at the church service. Out of respect for the preaching, the colonel patiently waited until the conclusion of the gospel message. At the close of the service, Brother Holton addressed his brethren of the Hopewell Baptist Church with the sad news that they had just received that Britain army had invaded and killed many of their brethren. He went on and he addressed the Baptist church with this question. And the question that he asked the church was, men and brethren, the redcoats are killing our brethren of Massachusetts. And he asked the question, who follows me to Boston? In reply, every man in that Baptist congregation stepped out to line up, and they answered, I. It said that there was not even one in the entire congregation did not see the cause for the fight for liberty. So whether however our individual convictions are, whether we like to believe it or not, Baptist was very much a part of fighting for what we have today. And I can't keep from just being beyond thankful that they were. I want to look at one of the, I guess it was a small battle, but it was a huge battle. And I want to look at some of the influence there. As Britain prevailed, and this is the question, what would be the turning point for America? Britain began prevailing. Ferguson came over into Georgia, and he was just taking everything from Georgia into the Carolinas, and they was just sweeping. And Ferguson was a man. He was Cornwall's right-hand man, so to speak. He had never lost a battle that he had ever fought, but they were prevailing. And then the question is, what would be the turning point then for America in order that we actually was able to gain freedom? And I want to go through this just a little bit. There had been a previous battle at Amalance in North Carolina. Many of the Baptist churches, there was massive amounts of churches over there in the Carolinas. I mean, this was the Separatist Baptists, the Shubal Stearns, and just there was an explosion of revival over there, and they were just massive numbers of Baptist churches in that time frame over there. But it said that because of the previous battle at Amalance in North Carolina, which is in the immediate area of a lot of where the churches were, many Baptist churches were broken up in that area. Morgan Edwards even records as many as 1,500 families had fled westward, making their way across the rugged Carolina mountains into what is now eastern Tennessee and Kentucky. Along with other Baptist churches, which began to spring up in this area, Buffalo Ridge and Sinking Creek were known to be the first churches on Tennessee soil. There was a preacher by the name of Elder Titus Lane, known as a church planter out of the Sandy Creek Church from North Carolina, and he was among the settlers that established Buffalo, and he himself established Buffalo Ridge in 1779. That is believed to be the first church on what is now Tennessee soil, and I've been there too. It's breathtaking to go over there and just be able to see some of those things. But they had actually fled, and like we said, according to Edwards, at least 1,500 families had fled, and they made their way across the rugged mountains and got over in East Tennessee, and then they had the Indians to deal with, much less the journey across those mountains, and there wasn't no trails cut, so it was a rugged journey. But they got over there, and they're starting to get settled in. They're organizing some churches over here in East Tennessee, and Titus Lane, after he had organized Buffalo Ridge, he became their first pastor. Now, not only was Elder Titus Lane in the spiritual warfare for liberty as a church planter and a pastor, but he would also now find himself in the physical war against Britain. The British Army that was led by Patrick Ferguson under General Lord Cornwallis had already taken everything from the eastern shores of Georgia and the Carolinas and coming inland westward some 150 miles to an area just west of the North Carolinas called, and there was a little area over there that was called Kings Mountain. Kings Mountain battlefield is located on the state line of North and South Carolina. More so, South Carolina. You ought to take a trip over there. It's worth the drive. Titus Lane and the Buffalo Ridge Church that was founded on Tennessee soil was far to the west, on the opposite side of the rugged Carolina Alps, and they were plumb out of the jurisdiction of Britain. Yet at the same time, they knew that still their liberty was in jeopardy. Ferguson. Now Ferguson, remember, he was the general, the leader there of the Britain battle, and he had been, as I stated before, he had been victorious. Let me shut my phone off. He had been victorious in every battle that he had ever led in. Now, what happens is Ferguson makes a very fatal verbal mistake. He declares two things. He declares one thing, that all of those that had fled across the mountains of the Carolinas over onto Tennessee soil and Kentucky would either submit to England and to her church, or he himself would cross the mountains and hang their men and burn their homes. That was one of his fatal mistakes. And the second verbal mistake that he made, he declared himself as to be the king of Kings Mountain, and he claimed that even God would not be able to remove him from that mountain. We need to be careful what we say. When Titus Lane and the settlers of East Tennessee and Kentucky had heard this, they declared amongst themselves that Patrick Henry had previously said, give me liberty or give me death. September the 25th, 1780, up to 400 Virginians and Kentucky settlers traveled down to meet up with 600 settlers in East Tennessee at Sycamore Shores, which is in Elizabethtown, Eastern Tennessee. Many, if not most, of these men were actually baptized believers, including Elder Titus Lane, his son, and a number of the members of the Buffalo Ridge Church was also included. On this day, not knowing if they would ever return to their families or not, which some didn't, yet they set out for a 12-day journey, crossing back over the treacherous Cherokee Mountains, for almost an impossible attempt to stop and defeat Ferguson and his army. These men in our history today are known as the Over the Mountain Men. They put everything on their line in order to begin the turnaround of the Revolutionary War. Along the 180-mile struggle toward Kings Mountain, it was about 180 miles from East Tennessee back over the mountains to get over to Kings Mountain. It said along that 180-mile struggle toward Kings Mountain, others from the Carolinas as well as Georgia would join in the totaling up around 2,000 men. Yet, on their journey on October the 5th, which was just 2 days before they were fixing to actually arrive at Kings Mountain, 900 of those 2,000, 900 of them was selected to pursue in haste due to knowing that Ferguson had been warned by 2 spies of their coming. This was now at the Battle of Gideon somewhat. Even a smaller army of untrained farmers and pioneers to face Ferguson with his trained and very much equipped army has now even been made smaller. Yet there was a God-given zeal for liberty that would overwhelm their tremendous fear in order to pursue. So actually now it's numbered down to 900 men that actually go to pursue in this battle at Kings Mountain. On the 7th of October, against all odds, and this was in 1780, a one-day battle, actually just over 1 hour of actually crucial bloody battle, would change the course of the entire Revolutionary War. Some 900 over the mountain men, mostly baptized believers, surrounded Ferguson and his army on the peak of Kings Mountain, just west of Charlotte. And this was within 1 day's journey from Britain's reinforcement. In other words, the timing on this, God had to orchestrate all of this. If they had been 1 day later, Britain had reinforcement coming because the spies had let them know that these men, these over the mountain men, were coming. So they got there just 1 day before the British reinforcement actually got there. 1 day later, it would have been probably a whole different story for us today in America. But after a short and yet a very bloody battle, it was here that Ferguson, who had said that even God would not remove him from this mountain, has now met his Waterloo. Ferguson's body was found with 7 fatal bullet wounds. Eventually, the survivors of the over the mountain men, including Pastor and now Captain Titus Lane, would be able to return to their families. Titus Lane lost at least one of his sons, which was a member of the Buffalo Ridge in the battle, along with many other lives that was given for the cause of liberty. So, in answer to our earlier question, was Baptist involved beyond prayer? And all we can do is admit, absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of Baptist involvement in order for us to have the liberty that we have. This one battle that we speak of at Kings Mountain, this little battle is recognized in American history as being the turning point of the Revolutionary War. Had this battle not been fought and won, there may not even be an America today. And I don't think we can really grasp the importance of that. 3 different presidents, probably more, but I got these 3 different presidents make this quote concerning these over the mountain men that pursued in this battle. And like I said, many of them were Baptists. But Theodore Roosevelt, he wrote concerning the Battle of Kings Mountain. And I'm just picking out little small quotes, but he said, this brilliant victory marked the turning point of the Revolutionary War. He acknowledged, the president of the United States acknowledged that this was the turning point of the Revolutionary War. Thomas Jefferson, he called it the turn of the tide to success. And Hoover, I picked him out too. Hoover, when he was in the office, he had went and visited Kings Mountain, and he said this, this is a place of inspiring memories. Here, less than 1,000 men, inspired by the urge of freedom, defeated a superior force. This small band of patriots turned back a dangerous invasion well designed to separate and dismember the united colonies. It was a little army, it was a little battle, but it was a mighty portent. In other words, God's protecting hand. And that's what is even acknowledged in our American history. And a lot of this should be not only Baptist history, but it should be taught, I believe, in our school system. I believe it is, you cannot hardly study a lot of American history without getting into Baptist history and vice versa. So we'll try to hurry along. The America's victory as the Revolutionary War is dismissed with prayer. So finally, in September the 3rd, 1783, the Revolutionary War had finally come to an end. And Britain actually signed the treaties of Paris, acknowledging and formally ending the war. So now the war's ended. It was at this time that George Washington was to select a minister to pray the dismissal prayer of the war. John Gano. John Gano. And wouldn't you know it, is a Baptist preacher. It was a Baptist minister, John Gano, who prayed the dismissal prayer concluding the end of the Great Revolutionary War. It was not of another denominational preacher, but it was a Baptist minister that was selected. John Gano, and we'll go ahead and get this in. John Gano was a Baptist chaplain in Washington's regiment on the battlefield, and it is believed and recorded by several historians, yet not completely proven, that Washington had Gano to baptize him in the Potomac River during the battle to demonstrate his belief in religious liberty, which he was fighting for, by being baptized with a believer's baptism rather than the state church infant baptism. You'll find over in Missouri, there is a painting that is reserved in the John Gano Chapel of the William Jewell College that's located in Liberty, Missouri. And the painting is of George Washington being baptized by Gano in waist-deep water. He wasn't sprinkled, if this history holds true. Also in the college, they have reserved the famous sword that was given as a memorial of the victory of the Revolutionary War. Now, notice throughout history that Baptists were always persecuted by what was referred to as a religion by the sword, basically forced to accept infant baptism or state church, or either suffer all the consequences. It is evident that Washington's right-hand man in the battle was Marcus Lafayette. Down here in Tennessee, that's Lafayette, but we'll stick with Lafayette, I guess. But Marcus Lafayette was the one that for defeating the British Army. Lafayette, out of great honor, had given his battle sword to Washington for his own keeping. Not to be taken lightly at all. Washington gives the memorial sword to the Baptist preacher, John Gano. So John Gano, the Baptist minister, ended up with what is known as the memorial battle sword of the Revolutionary War. If history holds true in this event, and having evidence in Liberty, Missouri, then by George Washington becoming the first president and being remembered as the father of this nation, then by giving the memorial victory sword to Baptist John Gano, certainly this shows much humility and reverence to the Baptist people and their influence. Beller, James Beller, in his book, America Crimson Red, I think he says it pretty well concerning this sword and concerning the baptism. He said, for the Baptists, looking back through the leaves of history, the meaning of baptism and the sword ought to be clear. America is not under the baptism of England, nor the baptism of Europe, nor especially of Rome. America's baptism has no earthly headquarters. His kingdom is not of this world. In conclusion, from the beginning to the end of the war, there was much unidentified Baptist influence. So again, the question, like it or not, were Baptists involved beyond prayer? Humbly, but yet absolutely. I pray that rather than this swelling our pride, may it wilt us to a godly humility and strengthen our faith for what lies ahead for us today, and especially for our children. That would conclude the physical influence of the Baptists. And if the good Lord would be willing, next week we want to try to look at the political battles as far as putting laws in place that we could have that would lead up to the 1791 religious liberty that we have. But again, thank you very much for tuning in. I pray that somehow you'll get something out of this. And I will turn it, I guess, back over to Brother Jeremy.
All right. Well, thank Brother Bronner again for the lesson tonight. I especially really enjoyed that last quote there. But let's be in prayer for him again as he comes back next Thursday night. We'll be back at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That'll be our final lesson of this series as far as Baptist history as he continues with this. But let's be in prayer for him, and hope everybody has good services on Sunday, and everybody have a good evening.